know, it's been a while.
So tell me what's been happening.
Well, I've been keeping busy. Well, not busy. I don't like to use that word, and I've learned that from you. I like to keep productive.
That's better.
Productive. Yes, I've been very, very productive lately.
Nice.
I've been working with various clients and that are trying to pivot in this, time of crisis to more online engagement, online content rather than having in-person events. So, and they want, their product to be done in a very, very short period of time. So that's what I've been working with lately.
So therefore they come to the best in the business, Mrs. Camille Tuutti. .com. Yeah, so
Yes,
you know the way
exactly.
I just don't like saying that I'm busy at all, because I think it's such a throwaway, silly thing to say, and it's overused. People always say, "What are you up to?" "Oh, I'm busy," but are you? What are you?
I know.
Are you busy watching Netflix? Are you busy, at the gym? Are you busy with work or whatever? So I'm either productive, or I'm chilling, or I'm training, or I'm doing something. So I never like to use that word, but it's so easy to use it sometimes.
Oh, yeah, it's a catch-all for, it could be like, I'm actually busy with work, or I am, in yoga class or on my way to a Pilates or yoga class. I don't have time to chat, or I'm, spending time with family and friends, and I just want to say that I'm busy. And a lot of people use the being busy as an excuse, but it's also like if you say that you're busy, it kind of stresses you out. It's
Yeah.
all it, so you taught me like, to kind of think of it in a different way. So now I say that I'm being productive because that's really what what I am. I'm being productive. I'm producing and I'm working.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with the word grind and hustle.
Yeah.
Those two words stress me out. So when people say that they're grinding and hustling, I'm like, I'm not, I don't like that.
Sounds
It
violent, doesn't it?
has yeah, yes. And yeah, it stresses me out, and I like to work effectively and efficiently. So grinding and hustling, it just isn't, that kind of, it just doesn't fit my kind of work
Yeah, but
style.
it's more of an it's so whenever I was writing the book about empowering the feminine, it was actually about this, because our business culture is so masculine and so violent. Like, we're always talking
Hmm.
about crushing it and grinding and, beating the other person. And just think about that, like beating someone, what that actually means, you know.
Yeah.
So my whole thing was, let's actually have a business meeting look something more like a family dinner type scenario, where people are sitting around and they're talking the way they normally would, without the aggression and without the force and without the trying to seem macho. And even the
Hmm.
most softest people, when they go into the business environment, they actually ramp things up to such a sort of macho, extremely macho and extremely sort of violent, when you consider the words that we're using, sort of a scenario, and it's unnecessary. I mean, I just because, so if we say we're busy, it doesn't mean that we have to. It doesn't mean necessarily I'm busy. It just means I have a list of priorities, and at the moment, I'm actually doing work. Another time, my priority is just to sit on the sofa and do nothing. But it means that I'm
Hmm.
prioritizing this for myself, and that's okay. That's definitely allowed.
Yeah, yes. No, I agree with you. I mean, we have these business meetings that are harken back to, an old era of how, businesses were run in the past, and now it's weird going into a meeting. Now, like when I go into a meeting, I try to have an agenda, and you and I talked about this previously. And you kind of, make sure that everyone is heard and that you actually accomplish something instead of having meetings or, about meetings.
Yeah.
Uh, that was my one of the things that I really disliked being a corporate culture, because you would have these meetings after meetings after meetings and nothing would get accomplished. So you just sit around and you have the leader talk, and get very little input from the other, from the employees. And then it was just an opportunity for that person to hear themselves talk and really not take any input from other people. And that's absolutely not how I like to run a meeting.
Yeah.
I like it to be more inclusive. And, I'm a big proponent of the marketplace of ideas. So I want to amplify and highlight diverse voices, whether it's from someone who is an expert or someone who happens to be in the room and in the meeting just because, they have a different perspective.
Yeah. And I mean, your opinion on that is as valid as anyone's. You're a girl from the Nordics. You've been working and living at the very forefront of business within Washington, D.C., which has now become the most competitive landscape on the planet over the past 3 or 4 years. And it's being listed as such whenever you look at the number of highly talented individuals that are moving to that city and the number of large corporations which are setting up their headquarters within that city. So you're really dealing with the best of the best every day. So one of the reasons I wanted you to come on and share your views was exactly what you're talking about now. What you have to say is so current and probably so next generation for a lot of us people who are listening to you speak. And you have been working in various ways and various platforms, but you've always been at the most competitive level. So can you give us an example of what it's like to work in Washington, D.C.? And as you say, is it very hierarchical with the boss talking down? And is it still is the narrative still so masculine and sort of macho?
Well, I'm a woman in the tech trade journalism industry. So yes, for me it's, it's been an interesting journey, but I've been fortunate, I progressed pretty quickly in my career. So I was a reporter, and I went from being a reporter to editor-in-chief within 4 or 5 years.
Of course you did.
So for the past, well, I like to move fast and I don't like to waste time. So I also had this particular goal always. But how is it to work in Washington, D.C.? Well, you are surrounded by really, really brilliant people. People come to D.C. to have a career. You are surrounded by people with at least master's degrees and PhDs. I know several people with PhDs, and it's not unusual at all. So the landscape is really competitive. And in terms of how it is in the workplace, well, I have been a boss,
Yeah.
I've been the top editor for the past few years. So, but when I called meetings, I still like to hear, what everyone had to say, because I hate being the smartest person in the room. And there's a saying, if you're always the smartest person in the room, you need to find a new room. So for me, I know my limitations. So when I go into a meeting, and I also know my strengths. So when I go into a meeting, I don't ever assume that I know the best. I'm not the expert, but I like to hear everyone's input, especially from my team, and especially if it's a team that I have gathered, because I know I have hired and put these people in place for a good reason. So even if you have, non-traditional or unconventional ideas, I still want to hear them, because sometimes I may not know, the right solution or the best way to approach something. And it's actually pretty often. So for me to be a leader and come into a room and really hear everyone out and really try to nudge the people whose voices aren't always heard. I think that's really important, because you will always have someone who talks the most in a meeting, right? And that usually happens to be almost always a man. So you kind of have to make an effort to include the other people as well and call on them instead of, waiting for them to say something. You might just turn to, let's say, Lisa in the corner and say, "Hey, Lisa, what do you think about this? How would you approach this this idea. So going back to your question, is it, like a really hierarchical, workplace, or, approach to work? I would say it is, but I've been fortunate that I've been working in places where everyone's opinions were valued.
Yeah, I think maybe in Europe it's more flat, the hierarchy. I think in Sweden it's exceptionally flat, because even if someone is new to the team, and we have discussed the issue 100 times before, if they think that they want to talk about it, then we will all sit and listen and let them sort of verbalize their thoughts and what they think and where they believe it should go. And although it takes time, I think it's so vital that that person is allowed to sort of walk through the process in their head that everyone else has sort of went through, and realize that the reason we have come to this conclusion is this. And maybe it didn't work in the past, but maybe this new person is able to put it in a new format or a new slant in a way that actually makes us go, oh shit, that's actually, maybe that wasn't relevant 6 months ago, but maybe it's super relevant today,
Yes, and you actually jogged my memory on this, because in my previous workplace, when I was the editor-in-chief, we had a young man who was hired as an assistant, like an admin. He was a temp. He came in and he was incredibly smart. And he was, just a temp, just an admin, helping out with, various administrative tasks and, when needed, picking up the slack here and there. But we realized that he was such an asset to the company. So I think it's important to not just look at the titles like, oh, let's bring in the C-suite into this meeting because they know the best and they are the experts. Like, you can actually get great ideas and creative problem-solving ideas from everyone. It doesn't have to be just the leaders in the community, in the company.
Yeah. There's another thing that's happened in the past year and a half that is quite extraordinary that you've been involved in, particularly from an American perspective. You decided to quit your job, leave your home, and most importantly, walk away from your 1,000 pairs of designer shoes to become a digital nomad and live sort of out of a bag on your own terms. Do you want to tell us about the thought process that, leading up to that enabled you to at least consider it before you went through with it?
Yes. So it was one of those days when you realize, you wake up and you say, I'm not happy. I've reached the pinnacle of my career. I am the editor-in-chief, or you are the most senior executive in your company, and you have everything, but you realize that you're not happy. So I actually sat down and thought about what would make me happy. And I had this idea, like, I wanted to leave DC. I wanted to travel full time. I wanted to be close to the beach, and I wanted to be somewhere beautiful. And I didn't want to go into the office every day. I didn't mind working every day. I just didn't want to have to go into an office, have a boss, small talk with Susan in accounting every day. I wanted something different. So that's what I did pretty much. One of the things that really propelled me to, pursue this was that I really didn't have much to lose. Sure, I had a really nice job, a really nice salary. People knew me in the community. I was a guest on podcasts. I was featured on TV and things like that. But it wasn't making me happy. And then I had a little bit of a health crisis that made me realize that life is too short to be miserable. I wasn't miserable per se, but I just wasn't truly happy. I had lost that passion for journalism a little bit. So that's when I decided that I want to go to Mexico, because I had been to Mexico previously and loved it. And my husband and I, along with our French bulldog Freya, left DC and went to Mexico for 15 months.
Yeah, amazing. And so I remember your road trip going down. It didn't go completely because I was following it on Instagram each day and going, "This girl's a rock star." And it didn't go completely smoothly, which is always a good thing because you learn a lot from it. But whenever you arrived in Mexico, I mean, you were literally living in the best apartments on the beach. You were working, you know, a couple of hours a day and getting the same level of productivity done. And you were working on your terms after coming back from, Bikram yoga and after going for your vegan smoothies and whatever else. And to follow it from afar, it was, for me, it was so empowering because, as you know, I quit my job in 2007 and went backpacking. And
Mhm.
I know it's a bit more accessible in Europe to do that, but from an American perspective to do it, it takes so much belief and strength in who you are as a person to sort of sell it up and go, especially across the border to Mexico. So, what was your work life like when you arrived down there? Like, what was your new vibe?
Well, I had also set up my company. I wanted to run an editorial consultancy and work with tech companies on getting their message in front, their content message and thought leadership in front of a public sector audience. So, because that's where my expertise is. So, I was able to go from, working like 40 to 50 hours a week to working, 2, 3 hours a day and producing as much as I had done previously. But when you really remove the unnecessary socializing, I'm saying unnecessary because I'm thinking about like, you have to hang out with your colleagues and your bosses, whether you like it or not. And sometimes it's nice, but most of the time it's pretty time consuming.
Yeah,
And then you remove the meetings, and so I would work on my own terms, as you said. I would get up whenever I wanted to get up. I had deadlines for all my projects that had come in. I had clients, steady clients that have now been with me for almost 2 years. And I worked when I felt most efficient. I worked when I felt inspired. I could do whatever else I liked during the day. I could go to the beach. We were living, half a block from the beach. And, these beautiful beaches. We were in Cancun first, then Playa del Carmen,
yeah.
and then we ended up in Mexico City.
I'm recording this podcast through Anchor, and if you're considering doing a podcast and you haven't heard about Anchor, then let me tell you, it's the easiest way to do a podcast. So let me explain. It's free. There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute the podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many other platforms. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. And it's everything that you need to make a podcast all in one place. Definitely check it out. Download the app now from the store.
Um, and that kind of freedom is just indescribable. And I mean, you have been working like this as well. So you know how it is to be someone who goes into an office and puts in ungodly amount of hours, when you're trying to build your career, because there were years when I put in, 60, 70, 80 hours a week. I was grinding and hustling back then.
Absolutely
Now it's
grinding.
more of a now it's more of a sustainable pace. And I have office hours. I and I keep I was gonna say I keep busy, but I'm very productive. I get all my, I keep my clients happy because I get everything done uh, before the deadline, and life is good.
And the magical part about this is even though you went from 50 with the 50 to 15 with the 15 in hours, your salary didn't take the same drop in um, on a level. You basically were able to even it out at the same rate, or if not increase it, in sometimes, weren't you?
Yes, I've been very fortunate. Yeah, I was able to retain a six-figure salary, and my company has done really, really well.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the biggest fears. I've never dreamt of being an entrepreneur or CEO. I never thought it was in the cards for me. I mean, I grew up with a father who was a CEO and small business owner. My brother was one as well. But it just seemed like something that wasn't for me, right? And then now it's like the greatest thing in the world. That's all I want to do, really, to
Yeah.
be a CEO and grow my company and hire more people and take on more exciting projects.
Yeah. And the thing that I want to say to this too, particularly to the younger people listening, is although Camille and myself did do the grinding and the hustling, as it's called, where we did the 80-hour weeks, there's a certain necessity for that at a certain stage of your career. I mean, by being in the office around people who are, really advanced in their career and have a lot of experience, just by being around those people for 40 to 80 hours a week, you can learn so much from them. But talking to the people who are going into their late 30s and 40s and 50s, I'm saying you don't need to be doing that at that age. You've been around the people enough. You know what the water cooler chat's going to be tomorrow. It's unnecessary.
Yes.
You should really be thinking about what can I do to make my life work for me, to make my hours work for me, and to make money work for me. I'm all for the grinding and the hustling in your 20s and in your late teens, because there's a certain amount of being around educated and highly driven and competitive people that you can learn from and pick from, but don't let them turn you into another version of who they are. That's their path, and that's the way they deal with whatever sort of challenge that they come up against in life. But I've always maintained that I'm Patrick Hamilton Walsh, and that's good enough. It's not the best in any way, but it's good enough across a range of things. And as long as I know who I am, then I will get along okay.
Well, Patrick, you also happen to be really, really good at everything you do. So, your good enough is actually pretty incredible to me, who has watched you, over the past decade, do everything you set out to do. And that's incredible. I mean, I absolutely agree with you that when you're young and you're building a career, you got to put in those hours. You cannot be like, I'm going to work 3 hours a day, not have an office, because you need to learn from people. You need to learn the good and the bad. You need to have a horrible boss so you can learn how not to be. You need to have inspiring mentors. You need to have great colleagues. And just people around you so you can learn from them. Not only learn, but also teach other people. So I think that's super important when you're young. But as you said, you come up to our age, and no, you shouldn't be working the same way you were when you were several years younger, when you were, in your 20s or even 30s.
Yeah. Did you have, when you were at school, did you have a really good teacher or a really good person in sort of another way that you could look up to, who really give you this sort of solid work ethic that you have and this sort of global approach that you have, which is so unique?
Well, when I was in school in Sweden, when I was very, very young, I had an incredible teacher who was always going above and beyond to really help me learn and be the best student I could be. I don't know where she is in the world today, but she really connected with me on a personal level, and she knew that I was going to do something different. I always had the dream of coming to America and being a journalist. That has been my dream since I was 5 years old. I have I've had really great professors in college. But I think that the teachers I had as a very young girl and who saw the potential in me, I really think that they put me on the right path. I always knew that I was great at writing. I was great at spelling. I would get annoyed at spelling tests because they were so easy. This was in Sweden, growing up in the 80s. I don't know if kids still have spelling tests, but I guess they do. But
I hope so.
It was a different kind of learning environment back then. They might have their iPads to do it on or other tablets. But I felt like school was never a challenge for me because I did really well in languages and writing and reading. But I did have a couple of teachers who were really encouraging, but I also had really bad teachers. When I went to, gymnasiet in Sweden, I had a math teacher who said I was stupid. I've never been good at numbers. It's just not my thing, but he actually said that I was stupid and I was a hopeless case. Yeah. So that wasn't very encouraging.
It's crazy when these people are paid. Such a kind word from a teacher can go so far in a person's life, never mind a student's life. And I have to be honest, I have never had a good teacher, like the whole way through.
Really?
No, never. I've never had someone who could I actually had the opposite. I had the people do what you did. They would actually tell me I wasn't going to go anywhere and all that. And again, it didn't matter to me because their opinion, I didn't value their opinion, and I didn't really respect them as people, actually. And I wasn't a troublemaker or anything like that. They didn't have any impact on me in a positive way. And the only impact that any of the teachers had, if it was anything at all, was negatively. Where a few of them had told me, even when I was 16, I decided I was going to do something with my life. And whenever the teachers asked who knows what they're going to do when they leave school, I was the only person in the class that put up my hand, and I said, I'm going to be an accountant. And the first teacher says, oh no, you can't do that. That's too hard. And then another teacher, who was like the cool teacher at school, he actually brought me aside in one's errand and says, here, Patrick, my most smartest friend tried to become an accountant. He tried to do all those exams, but he could never do them. He could never pass them. So my advice to you is to, don't even bother because, they are tough. And I was thinking, who the hell do you think you are? I was probably 17 now at this stage. You don't know anything. Your friend could have been drinking. He could have been sleeping in. It could have been doing 100 different things that didn't lead him to, passing his exams. And they are tough exams, and you need to be on your game. So just being smart has not got anyone anywhere. It's about practicality and putting in the grind, the hustle, whatever we call it, to actually come out the other side of that process. There's a lot of more people who have done well with minimal levels of talent and intelligence, who have just put in the work, than there is people who have been smart and thought that they would cruise through it. Because we live in a world now where cruising through it doesn't get you anywhere. And you might be able to blag it for a very short time, but you do get found out. And being the smart guy or being the whatever guy is not going to suffice.
No, I agree with that. And it's so interesting that you had that experience in school, because I was pretty much the opposite, because I was always very good in school, and the teachers were like, oh, Camille I don't know what the grading system is in Sweden anymore, but she got an A again. And they would announce this to the class, and then my classmates would get really bitter and call me a nerd. So I got bullied a lot for being just the weird girl who did really well, but wasn't very social.
Yeah.
Books, Yeah, go
No, but
ahead.
the thing is, you had a different dream. Your dream was not to be one of the gang as a Finnish Swedish girl. Your dream was, I want to be in America in the next 15 to 20 years, and the best way for me to get there is to actually learn how to spell, learn how to speak English, learn how to do X, Y, and Z. And it's whenever I know you now 12 years, and that's what I see in you. You're someone who, whenever you set your mind to achieving a goal, you win. Like, you do win. You might not, if you don't win today, then you'll win tomorrow.
Yeah, I think that comes from I have that in my DNA, that I'm stubborn, and if I set my mind to achieve something, I will achieve it. So my father was, as I mentioned, he was a CEO and small business owner. He was a very successful businessman. He worked a lot. I mean, he was a workaholic, but that was his passion. He always said, if you make your hobby if you make your hobby your work, it will never feel like work. So,
Fantastic.
yeah, so he was really, really always at work. Yeah, so as a kid, I didn't appreciate that he was never home, but he was always providing for his family. And we would travel a lot. That's probably where I got that travel bug from, because we would travel the world with him, and go to these exotic places. It wasn't Gran Canaria, like most Swedes
Wow.
would go to, or Majorca. I mean, it was Thailand, it was
Wow.
Singapore.
Back in the 80s,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I was in Thailand before it became cool and such a, you know, hot spot for tourism. It was pretty much unruined
What
back then.
what was your takeaway from that trip to Asia? Like, what impacted you the most at that time?
I, I think we went in a winter time when it was winter here in Sweden. So obviously coming to these beautiful beaches, and Sweden, as you know, is very quiet. So coming to Bangkok and you see the crazy hustle and bustle of the city. I like to tell people that I actually got chased by a baby elephant in Bangkok,
Wow.
and that is a true story.
I believe it.
It was just a baby elephant on the street. Yeah. Different smells, different pace that we were used to. And I remember looking at all the tall buildings and I was in awe. I was like, I love this.
Yeah.
It was so exotic to me. But that wasn't my first trip. My first trip was actually to Cyprus when I was very, very young. And then we just traveled all over the world pretty much.
Amazing.
And my dad, yeah, he really instilled in me that work ethic, and he would, I think he would be, he's not alive. He passed away almost 5 years ago, but I think he would think that it wasn't that unexpected that I became a CEO and decided to have my own company, even though it wasn't in the cards for me, or I didn't know it. But he would probably say that it made sense. And at the latter stage of his life, when he was sick in cancer, he would actually tell me that he regretted that he worked so much, and he said, don't work so much, which was completely different from when I was a kid, when he always said, work hard, whatever you do, work hard.
Yeah.
So yeah, that has been my experience.
There was a woman in Australia called Bronnie Ware, and she worked in palliative care. And I've got a few questions which I always ask people in chit chat, and she had a similar sort of approach. And because she was working with these old people in the last days of their life, she would always ask them the same few questions. And one of the questions she always asked them was, what was your biggest regret? So as a result of that, she realized that everyone was basically saying the same 5 things. And the second biggest regret, so she wrote a book about it called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. And she says the second biggest regret that people had is that they work too much. And I mean, around the world, if you look at the people who work the 60. If you look at the middle class and the lower class, there's actually not that much of a gap between them. You know, they still go on holidays a couple of times a year. They still, you know, there's just variations. They all own a car. So instead of owning a BMW, they own a Ford, you know. And considering the amount of effort that the people who are putting in 60 to 80 hours are doing compared to the people who are putting in 20 to 40, the return on investment isn't that big, actually. And the number one biggest regret that people had was, and it sounds a bit fun, but I'll explain it. It says living a life which was not true to themselves. That was how she described it. And what that means is people were too busy trying to fit in and make people like them and trying to, you know, talk about the latest news story and all that type of stuff. And they're like, why? Like, those people didn't even want to talk about it. I didn't want to talk about it, but it was just a thing. So people are talking about the virus or whatever at the moment, or they're talking, whenever the virus is over, they'll talk about the recession. And then they'll talk about the well. And I have a rule where I don't get involved in the latest news story. The most I've talked about the virus has been on the few podcasts that I've been on, because it doesn't matter. The world is going to go the way it's going to go anyway. And me talking about it is probably not going to make my life any better. And if I've got this rule where I don't follow any news either, because I always believe if something if it's important enough, it will find me. News will find you if it matters. So like you don't need to go looking what happened in New York today. Apparently a couple of airplanes crashed into a building. You don't need to find that news. It will come to you so quick because it's so relevant, you know. So I always just let the important news find me, and then I go, oh, okay, what does that mean to me? Probably nothing. And then I sort of go on with my life. That's my approach.
I think what you said about people living a life that wasn't authentic, I think a lot of people do that. And I feel like, you know, I had this identity that was, you know, Camille Tuutti is a journalist. And whenever I would tell people I was a journalist, they would be like, oh, that's really cool. That was the only reaction I will get from people. Well, there were a couple of times when people would say, oh, it must be hard being a journalist now that Trump is president, for example. That couple of times, but you know, because of the whole fake news thing and whatnot. But overall, people had positive things to say about it. So I got to a point where I was like, okay, what if I leave this job as an editor-in-chief and decide to go to Mexico and just open up my own editorial consultancy? Like, okay, what am I if I'm not a journalist? And then I started thinking about, okay, why does it matter, really? Is what I'm doing now making me happy? No. Would it make me happier to be on the beach in Mexico, do Pilates whenever I want, and work on projects I really love? Yes. So does the title really matter? No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
But so there is a little bit of there was a moment when I had an identity crisis of some sort. I mean, I still call myself a journalist because I work on projects that involve journalism and writing and editing for publications still. But, you know, I really want more people to realize that they shouldn't live for other people. You know, don't be afraid to be, you know, to stop living your life because you're afraid to be a disappointment to your parents or your spouse or your friends. I mean, why care, really?
Yeah.
And I think the more authentic you can be in your life and who you are as a person, the better you're gonna feel.
For sure. I have the same problem because when I was an accountant, it's a good, solid middle class job. You know, it's a profession, and it's easy for people to box. So whenever the people around me would say, oh, what's your son do? What's your niece, nephew, whatever do? Oh, he's an accountant. Oh, that's ticking a box. We can understand that. But whenever he's sold everything, he's went backpacking, he's writing a book, and he's living with a girl from Sweden. that's a different sort of thing. That, I mean, what type of son or what type of relation is that? You know, is he just this crazy guy? And the answer is yes, he is. He's crazy because he's doing the thing that all the normal people are not doing. And he's got a big smile on his face as he does it, because he's doing it on his own terms. And this is the thing that people don't understand. It's a lot of these titles actually are not placed on us ourselves. We sort of inherit them because it makes other people feel comfortable around us, and they can sort of box us in.
Yeah.
You know? And so if I never really ask people what they do, but if it comes to that question and I ask someone what they do, when they tell me what they do, the next question I ask them is why. So you're a journalist. I'm going to say why. And you would not believe how many people don't know the answer to the question as to why they're doing the thing that they've committed their life to. I mean, I'm studying this. Why? Oh, shit, never actually thought about it. But you're committing 40 to 80 hours a week by doing it. And the people who do know why are the people you want to have a chat with, actually. The people who can't answer that question, it's a matter of going, yay, see you later, man. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So why is better than how or what?
I always had this dream. You know, I jokingly say that there's only one thing I'm good at, and that's writing. Well, editing and writing. So I put these limitations on myself because I told myself this story for so long. You know, I don't even know if I could be good at math, because I've been telling myself since I was 10 years old that I am really bad at numbers. But what if I'm not? What if the story changed?
Yeah, you're probably not. That's someone else's opinion that you've taken on. And I don't agree with what you said there, because I've seen you presenting in front of groups. I've seen you writing. I've seen you review my books. I've seen you help me write my books. And I would say the skill that you have, which you probably are better than nearly everybody I've ever met at, is you're a great storyteller. And I mean that in the way that you're the person who can get information into people's minds in a way that they can understand it and follow it in the most simplistic of terms. And you have got a really great turn of phrase, both in spoken language and in written language, that enables you to do that. And you're probably, and this is why you're doing so well at your job, obviously, because you've got that unique skill set and you're so diligent in your approach to it. And I think you're just, I know you're a rock star in written, obviously, because I've read your stuff and I've followed you. But whenever we did that presentation, me and you did probably the last public presentation in Stockholm before they banned people doing those sort of things. And it was almost like we were probably 2 days late doing it in front of a group from Ireland. But the point is, you were so good in front of people as well. And I was thinking, this girl has got skills.
You know, that was off the cuff.
That was
off the cuff. No preparation whatsoever, and it went pretty well, I would say.
It went well, and this is why I prefer that way. Like, I know that I'm good enough. I know you're good enough, and you were like, "What do we need to talk about?" I said, "Let's just talk about what we know," because it's more. Yes. It's true then, and if you're talking about something that you believe in, it's something that's true to you. It's easier to get the message across in a way that it impacts the audience.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
And I think when you are really passionate about your story and you're passionate about wanting to help people, even if it's just one person, by sharing your story, people will listen. I think you don't have to be the best speaker. Obviously, I've had public speaking training, and have been on stage many, many times, and I never enjoyed it, to be honest.
Did you not?
I think.
Wow.
No, I would be so nervous.
Wow.
I was always expecting the worst, and what if I just pass out on stage? What if they hate me? Just really illogical fears.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I could pass out on stage, but that's likely not happening.
Yeah.
I think that I went as far as over preparing, and then you sound so rehearsed, and it sounds like you're reading off a script. So I think this off the cuff kind of commentary style is a much better fit for me.
Yeah. and you have enough to talk about. My approach is always now to basically not prepare, because I'm confident enough in that I can hold a conversation or I can hold a topic for long enough, and I can share what I know, and I can actually, if it comes down to it, I can go off and learn new things. But I'm not going to bullshit the audience, that's for sure, because people are smart and people know when you've run out of rope. So what I do is I actually just do a meditation before I go on podcast or before I go on stage or anything like that. What I do is a meditation, and I just ask for the perfect outcome for the person. So before I come on here with you, I was like, just please let Camille shine her brightest and get her message that she needs to get across. And I will do that for every person. I'll want that person who's the guest to be the best they can for the people who need to hear it. And at the same time, for the people who are listening, I will ask that the people who needs to hear the message and the things that we talk about today, it might only be one line, but please let them find it and hear it. And if that's one person, then we have done our job.
I absolutely agree with you. I think but I've always jokingly said that, this is not going to sound good, but that I don't like people, which is not true.
It's not true at all.
No, it's not true, because I can crave these deeper connections with people, and coming into people's lives and making a difference, or them making a difference in my life, and cultivating and forging really great relationships and friendships with people. I love doing that. When it comes to what is so common in Washington, D.C. and probably New York City, I've lived in New York City, but what I saw there as well is the kind of fleeting moments of connectedness, if you will. These are very shallow relationships that are transactional. And in DC, it's completely acceptable to meet someone for the first time and say, the second question will be, what do you do? And then it's completely acceptable to ask them, oh, are you hiring? Could you, put me in touch with the person who is hiring for this role? So it's very transactional, and then of course expected to do the same. But in this kind of culture of transactionalism, that's a word that I just made up, but a culture of transactions, I think, you lose the deeper meaning of relationships, and everything becomes just, I don't want to use the word transactional again, but it's you don't get to know people on a deeper level.
Yeah.
And you're making small talk at networking events, and you become jaded because all you hear is people talk about themselves. It's like they're reading their resume to you. This is very, very common in DC, you might be at a networking event, or you might be at a bar. I don't go to bars anymore, but there might be someone who is, especially a man, who's striking up a conversation with you, and he will tell you how much money he makes.
Actually,
what kind of job he has. Yes, wow. yes. That would never happen in Sweden. No. That would never happen in Sweden. But so it's I've been very fortunate that I have met the most amazing people in DC, and I have a group of probably 8 to 10 close friends just in DC. So there is, I think that there is a real hunger for meaningful conversation, meaningful relationships, and meaningful, conversation, I said that, but just meaningful meetings. Depth. rather than just having these really short, shallow conversations with people.
Yeah, I talk about this actually when I give it. There's a few presentations I do where I talk about the value of connecting with people, and those people, they hear like those social climbers, you can see them coming from a mile off. They sort of go around the whole room and see who can help them climb up the ladder one fraction of a step. And I feel sorry for them because they just don't get it. The secret to living is giving. I mean, you must give. And so therefore, whenever I don't go to networking events, I turn up at events. I'm never there to network, but the secret to networking is giving. The more you give, then the more you will get back. And it's not because you're looking for something. It's because someone will see something that they have that thinks that you would be a good fit for. You don't need to go around like begging for, jobs and stuff like that. And the crazy thing about that is that the place where I see it happening most from two different ways is North America and Africa. The richest society and the poorest society both act in that way. In Africa as well. Yeah, Africa is a very transactional society also. And people are looking for things. I mean, the same needs want to be met, but they're looking for them from a different perspective. And therefore, people can be really friendly to you on the surface. But there's no depth on it. They're just, in America, I would say the difference is it's a shorter game. They're just in and out. They're less patient. In Africa, they can build up, they can appear to be building up long relationships with you, but again, it's just transactional. So, and I know you said you don't go to bars anymore, and this is why I'm going to bring this podcast to an end, because the thing that comes into my mind is us in Las Vegas, me, you, my wife, your mother, my brother, jumping into a limousine and heading off into the night of Las Vegas. And that's always a good place to quit a podcast.
And we didn't drink.
Me and you didn't drink, even though we had a free bar. No. Me and you were very, very good people, like we are. We're very kind and boring people, and we're very responsible.
Yes. Let's leave on that note. Boring and responsible.
We're very boring and responsible people, and we'll take it. We're happy. I think we're both happy with our new position in society as the boring ones. So it's a good place to be, Camille. What do you think?
Yes.
So
I agree 100%.
Can I just say, taxomika, Kitos, I really appreciate you coming on. You're such an inspiration for me. You're one of my guardian angels in life. You do so much for me, and I wouldn't be halfway through half of the projects that I've worked on if it wasn't for your kindness and your expertise and your just really great sense of giving and compassion. And I really care for you so much. I'm so grateful to have you as a friend, and I'm sure people will be really happy to hear your insights on this podcast. And I'm going to leave your connection in the comments here so people can follow you and sort of connect through Tutti Frutti if they want to get business from one of the world's greatest storytellers and all of that.
Well, you have always been my biggest cheerleader, and I value our friendship so much. I mean, I always call you the Renaissance man because you do everything and anything, and you're incredibly good at it. So I'm a little envious. But I use that envy as motivation to get to the next level, and maybe one day I can be like you, Patrick.
No way. You don't need to be. You're just good enough being you, rockstar. But I really, that $100 trillion I give you, I need to update that because you've been so kind to me, as always. And I just appreciate you. So thanks very much, Camille.
Thank you.
Have a good one, darling. And it's my love to your mother and all your family.
Will do. Thank you.
God bless,
Same
darling. Take care.